Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Beyond Recovery. My guest today is Davy of the Strive Method. He's also the host of the 1,000 Days Sober, pardon me, easy for me to say, the 1,000 Days Sober podcast. Here he is. Lee, how are you today?
I'm fantastic. Yourself?
I'm great. Thank you for coming on the show today. I know we had, I think it's interesting the way the things worked out with our schedules because we're doing a little show swap.
Yeah.
And as it landed, it was like just the way that the reschedules worked out. We're doing our podcasts back to back. So literally you're doing on my show and then vice versa as soon as we're finished.
Back to back. Yeah.
Back to back, baby.
You're gonna ask me a lot of questions and then I'm gonna ask you a lot of questions.
Yeah, turn the tables on me. So yeah, I'm really excited for that. Yeah, you know what? I want to get into your personal story, about how everything your drinking career and how it just how that affected you, or basically how you got to where you are today. And then of course I really want to get into the Strive method and then a little bit about your podcast. But let's get the groundwork first off. Let's learn a little bit more about yourself and your origins.
Yeah, so my name is Davy and I come from, I was born in Manchester in the UK, and when I was 10 I moved to South Wales, which is a completely different country for those of you listening that don't know. And that actually was one of the most pivotal moments of my life, actually, when it comes to trauma. I'm half Chinese, 53% Chinese, and I was the only non-white kid in school there in Wales. So obviously I'd left all my friends behind and didn't know a soul. I was the only non-white kid. And also the Welsh have this thing where they don't like the English. So it's another really good example of skewed social culture. Nobody really has any reason why. They just kind of like hate them because their dad hates them and their dad hated them. Yeah. So I had a lot of abuse when I was younger. And I didn't actually realize how much it impacted me until just recently when I did a lot of work around that. But it did have a big impact on my drinking career because obviously I wanted to do everything I could to fit in and be a part of this tribe that so desperately didn't want me in it. And part of that was to just drink and be a complete dick, actually. So I went from being an A-grade student to just being an absolute idiot. I would say that that energy, what I now see clearly is hero energy, the last bastion of unhealthy masculine energy. I could see how that personality trait, those parts of me were really dominant. And, even going into my 40s, even as a sober guy, I still wasn't behaving like a man, right? Like I still wasn't healthy. I was still coming from a place of toxic masculinity and can so easily slip into those kind of streams today as well. I drank like everybody else where I grew up. Interestingly, actually on someday this week, on Friday, I met with some potential business partners in a cafe, and they were really interested in my story. And I was telling them how I help people to become people that don't drink alcohol. And, they were like, oh, right. So was you addicted? And I was like, yeah. And so was everyone else around me. And they were like, oh, so you was really fucked up then, were you? Yeah. And like everybody else around me. So you really had a problem with alcohol? And yeah. And so did everyone else around me. So, what's my point? My point is the definition of alcoholic for me is pretty skewed and needs kind of a repaint. I would say that I was surrounded by people who were addicted to alcohol and had a real issue with it, but would never, ever believe that because of the way that, the medical industry and society portrays that kind of thing. So I was just, I was married for 19 years when I realized that, hang on a minute, this thing is actually destroying me and my marriage, right? Like especially when my son was born 21 years ago, Like I would say my drinking game really increased at home. And I think once you start drinking at home a lot more and heavier, then the red flags really come up and you start drowning very quickly. We would have parties at the house where my boy was very, very just a toddler, and we would be getting smashed, and my friends would bring their kids around and they would get smashed, and then it was just a mess, really. And so I decided that I would try to stop drinking in order to save my marriage. It didn't work. We ended up splitting up. But when I learned that alcohol held no value and that the value that I thought it held was illusory, like my kind of light bulb moment when I stopped, um, it really angered me. The alcohol industry was the biggest villain, alcohol, the whole setup. And I was like, I need to do something about this. I need to tell the world about this. So it was part wanting to save the world from what I see as something that has no gains at all and just all negativity, like 100% negativity, no percent gains. So I wanted to help save the world from that. And also, I think I wanted to give myself accountability by creating like the 1000 Days Sober podcast used to be called the Alcohol Addiction Podcast. It's been going for like nearly a decade now. I think I just wanted that responsibility, that accountability, like if I stop drinking and tell the world that I've stopped and I'm not going to start again, then it'd be really, really difficult for me to start drinking again. There was a big part of that as well. So that was kind of like my catalyst to stopping drinking. And then I stopped drinking, and then my entire life changed then from that point on. I don't know if you want to ask me any questions about that period. I could tell you about my
Yeah.
second life. We've
Yeah,
all got two
exactly.
lives, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, no, a lot of great stuff in there. There's always the more guests I get on the show, there's obviously nuances depending on their life, where the environments and different things as you mentioned and the upbringing. But there are some commonalities. One of the big ones is the use of alcohol at an early age to fit in, this sense
Mm.
of you know, uh, not belonging to a certain tribe and using it as a bridge to sort of fit in or act like everybody else is acting. So that's interesting that you bring that up. That jumped out right away. I really like what you're talking about, and I'd like to dive into it a little bit more. Just like the toxic masculinity, and as we're of similar age, I'm sure. So it's man, it's come a long way from what has been viewed as that like the alpha male and the male that pushes down his feelings and so forth. Even in the last 5 years, I'd say the last decade specifically from my experience, anyways. So
Mm.
just getting a little bit into that specifically, that part of your journey, because that is a really cool little sidebar that we could do. So if you don't mind, just a little bit more into
Mm.
that, like when did you start realizing that element of your life experience was getting in the way, or like I guess when did you come up with the awareness of like toxic masculinity, and then what did you do to sort of course correct on that?
So I'm 47, right? And I stopped drinking, I don't know, around 35, something like that.
Mm.
So I always say to my audience, like you could stop drinking and still be a right prick, as we say in the UK, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it's really like with Strive, like our focus is less on being someone that doesn't drink alcohol and more on being present and grounded and all that good stuff, right? Like that's the most important thing. Um, so actually, in terms of like when did I develop the understanding that my, if we call it toxic masculinity, was an issue probably very recently, probably in the last 2 years. I trained to be a master life coach in 2021 with the Elementum Coaching Institute. So there I was under the wing of Preston Smiles, Stefanos Fandos, Alexi Panos, and Christine Hasler. And Stefanos and Preston, as a sidebar to what they do at Elementum, they have their own men's group in Austin, Texas, and it's huge. And there was a module in the Elementum coaching program around masculine and feminine dynamics, and that then led to me doing some reading. So I read the book, I think I think the book that I know that really opened my eyes to it was the King, the Warrior, Magician, Lover. And in that book, they were talking about masculine archetypes, and they were basically saying that it was a polarized. I'm going to express it as very polarized, but it was more nuanced than this. But in a very polarized way, you've got boy energy, you've got man energy, right? And it's the boy energy that is most often defined as toxic masculinity. It's like this unhealthy masculinity. And one of the character traits, what they talk about as being one of the final boy energy character traits to slay, is this hero energy. So they use the example of Tom Cruise's character in Top Gun. There's this kind of like guy who jumps on his motorbike and takes all the risks going, like wants to go 200 mile an hour, wants to jump in an airplane. And so he wants to do all these risks, and he wants to go to war, but he wants to go to war for his own sake. Like he wants to take these risks for, hey, look at me. Look how amazing I am. Look how brilliant I am, right? And it's less about going to war for his fellow men or for his country or whatever, which in the book, like a healthy warrior would do, right? Like I'm going to go to war for my family, not I'm going to go to war because, so for example, when I was going through this period where I was getting called a chink and an English bastard and all that kind of stuff, my father, who was deep rooted in his unhealthy masculinity, taught me essentially to go to war, right? Like he's like, okay, so this is what we're going to do. We're not even going to wait for them to call you a name. As soon as you feel that they do not like you, as soon as you feel any kind of antipathy towards you from anyone, you're going to go in all guns blazing, right? Yeah. So then it became about, okay, I got to do this because my dad said it. Like you're obviously terrified, but then you kind of get something out of that, right? Like, maybe the girls kind of like it because you fight. Some of the boys think you're crazy, you're nuts. So all of a sudden, this gung-ho getting in there, even if you're getting beaten up, the fact that you were going after these biggest kids in the school because, they're the bullies at the end of the day, you start to get this this outside in likes. Obviously, we had no social media back then, but you're getting your self-esteem filled from outside yourself, like other esteem, and then so there's that element, but then there's the other element that I didn't realize until after my first divorce, and then actually brought out of me by my wife Liza today, is the way that I behave in a relationship with a woman. So my upbringing was just observing my nuclear family dynamic was my dad was in charge. He was in charge. Why? Because he was the man. He was a disciplinarian. I mean, he was never physically violent, but if there was a big decision to be made in the house, my mum would say, it's up to your dad. If there was punishment to be doled out, she'd say, wait till your dad comes home. And he was physically stronger. He worked, my mum didn't. There was just, and then, so that's just me looking at my family. And then outside of that, in movies, TV, and all that kind of thing, the same thing is portrayed. So I grew up really believing that I was the boss. I was the boss. And even today, it is very easy for me, my brain, to go back into that old paradigm of I'm the boss. I'll just shout and scream my way and enforce rule through my dominance and my voice, which is what I used to do in the past. It wasn't really until I met Liza and got into a relationship with Liza, and Liza, who is she's a queen, right? She's super steeped in her feminine energy. She don't take no shit. She has really strong boundaries. And here's this boundaryless young boy. And she would say to me, like, you have no idea what it's like being in a relationship with a boy, right? Like everything you do is like a boy. You're not a man. Like you talk to me like you're a boy. You act like you're a boy. You have sex like you're a boy. Like, and I was just like, what? Yeah. What's going on? Wow. Like this is like tough feedback to get.
No kidding.
But it was huge because not only was it huge for me, I got a 21-year-old son, and then late in my 40s, I never thought would happen. I have a baby girl. I have a 6-year-old girl. I don't want to I don't want to seeing boy energy as being what she wants in her life, like, because that's my dad. So yeah,
Right.
in recent years, my shift to being more of a healthy man has kicked in, and I could definitely talk about that. What my worldview is of that. I mean, it's not
Absolutely. Yeah, it's great. I
universal.
that's exactly what I was going to ask. I'm like, what kind of things do you have in place? What corrections have you made to ensure that you have this more, balanced between the masculine and feminine, or this more
Yeah.
for the sake of a more developed, well-rounded masculine energy?
I mean, the first thing I'll say for anyone listening, any men listening, and any women listening as well, right? Even though we're talking about masculine energy, because women have masculine energy as well. But let's just say you're in a heterosexual relationship with like a typical relationship with a guy he's not really fulfilling your needs, because he's just all out for himself and his mates and stuff. First and foremost, let's try to find some compassion, and let's try to find some patience. If you're the woman, and then if you're the guy, don't be afraid of screwing up like continually. Like, no, for me, um, this stuff is hard. Change is difficult. It's very doable. But if you've been 45 years as a boy and all of a sudden you want to be a man, don't think it's just going to happen overnight, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Let me give you an example. This morning I woke up before my family. I made my daughter's lunch and I made her breakfast, and then I woke the girls up. And I was feeling really proud of myself, like, I'd done that good deed. And then my wife came in the kitchen, and I put ketchup in a container for her fish fingers. She took the ketchup out of that container and put it in another container. She took the fish fingers out of the packaging that I put them in and put them in another packaging. And then she proceeded to tell me why she was doing that. And I'll be honest with you, inside me, there was a part of me, a younger version of me, that was screaming out, do you know what? Fuck it. I'm not going to do it again. You can do it yourself. Right.
Right. Right.
So I then go into the front room. No, I took my daughter to school, and I come back and I have these needs cards here. They've got different needs on them, right?
Oh, cool.
And I was pulling them, and I was just saying, okay, what do I need right now? And I was pulling cards like I need appreciation, connection. And then I looked at appreciation. I was like, I really I need appreciation. And then I was like, actually, this is a mirror. I don't need appreciation. I need to appreciate my wife.
Ooh.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't need connection. Right. Like, I don't need my wife to connect me. I need to connect with my wife. Right.
Right.
What else was that? I don't need support from my wife. I need to support my wife. So every need that I pulled this morning, I realized that there's two ways you can go about it. You can dip into this drama triangle and this victim consciousness and start saying, I'm a victim. She tried to control me this morning. I'm a victim. She's a villain. And then that just goes into a whole load of drama, right? Or you can take responsibility and say to yourself, do you know what? What she was trying to do this morning, Lee, was to explain to you that she likes her daughter's lunch to be in a certain way. And she was giving you feedback on how she wants it. It's important to her. It's not important to me, right? So step up and thank her for showing you the right way to do the lunch. Because the next day, you can put the ketchup in the right container. You can pack the fish fingers in the right thing. But most of all, just tell her you love her and tell her you appreciate her giving you some feedback. Now, that to me is one little subtle difference between being a man and being a boy, right?
Right.
Because if I let the boy within me, the part of me that's going to be with me until the day I die, turn around and say to her, you do it. I'm not going to do it anymore, right? That is going to disconnect us. Now, the long-term goal here is for me to live a very beautiful, healthy life with my wife, right? That's the long-term goal. It's the same as the drinking. It's like, what's your long-term goal? Is your long-term goal to never drink forever? Then that changes, your plan today. Same as if I want to have a long-term relationship with my wife, which is beautiful, healthy, and connected, and passionate, all that kind of stuff. Then what decision do I make today when this little part of me comes up, right? So, what you need to do then is take 100% responsibility, get out of that drama triangle, and just say to yourself, okay, how can I deal with this differently and take responsibility? And it's just basically, Liza, I'm so sorry that my little child came out this morning and it
Mm,
felt controlled. And I imagine that made you feel a little bit irritated and annoyed and frustrated with me. And I need us to be connected, and I need you to trust that I'm a man and not a boy. And I apologize and thank you for, letting me know how to do the lunches.
yeah,
And she's like, thank you very much. And now we're
man,
connected, right? We went out for a
right.
run and a coffee and had a great morning, you know?
Yeah. You know, even
So,
when sorry I
oh,
just want to
yeah,
reflect back to you, like even when you're saying that, like that phrase at the end, like the energy even between you and me just lightened. You know what I mean? It seems like it's such a challenging, because it can be if the ego
yeah,
gets in the way of it and there's some resistance, ego is giving resistance. But you even just saying that well-formed phrasing about how I appreciate you showing me and all this, I could just feel, the energy just lighten up. So I can really see how that would make a difference, right? So I just wanted to reflect that
huge.
back to you more than anything.
Yeah, yeah, it's huge. But that doesn't come easy if the part of you that if the part of you, that traumatic little inner child part of you, right, which I have, which does not like to be controlled. And let's just be very clear: my wife wasn't trying to control me. Whether she is or not is irrelevant. The part of me was activated because many years ago, somebody tried to control me, and I didn't like it. Right.
Right.
So the body always remembers what the mind forgets. So when she's telling me to put the ketchup in this, it might be my mom telling me to do something I don't want to do. It might be a kid in school telling me, it might be a teacher, I don't know, but it activated something in me, right? So, you've got to give yourself compassion, because you're not going to get it right all the time. As long as your partner knows that you're really working your butt off to try to make a difference, then what I find is, you get these get out of jail free cards in Monopoly. The
Yeah.
more you try, the more you screw up, the more get out of jail free cards you get. And rather than it being a big, huge row because you said XYZ when she was fixing your lunchbox, it now becomes, oh, there's Lee's little inner child coming out. I'm now expecting him to fix that coming up. And if he
Yeah, I
doesn't,
gotcha.
if he
Yeah.
doesn't, I'll have a conversation with him. So
Yeah.
so that's super important. I also think another one, there's so many, but I'll just say one more.
Sure.
And that is being really, everybody uses the word vulnerable. But the way that it's really worked for me is to really protect your emotions, right? So one of the ones that nearly caused a divorce with Liza was my anger,
Mm,
right? So I get very angry, and that is a non-negotiable for her. She doesn't want me to be spewing my anger on her dishonorably, but I don't want to kill my anger, right? Like, anger is really important to me. Anger is what creates my boundary and what protects me and my family from outside influence, and it's what protects other people from me. Like, so I don't want a soft form of anger, say sarcasm or frustration, to develop into full-blown rage. So for me, learning to love my anger, learning to love my shame, to love hatred, to love sadness, and to recognize that I just want to cry right now, and the fact that my wife is there in front of me shouldn't stop me from wanting to cry, right? Like, that has been huge for me. Just crying on a bus because I something's happened that makes me want to cry, or train. Usually when I'm reading something, it's like and really talking and communicating that with my children and my wife is another real indicator that you've switched from this boy energy to more of a warrior energy. It's like
mm.
just really being symbiotic and being human and letting the emotions do what they're supposed to do.
Beautiful. I love that. I'm really glad that we did that sidebar into that. I mean, because ultimately it does go so much hand in hand with it's like emotional sobriety, they call it too, right?
Mm.
Like you said, you can be sober, but you can still be a prick. So,
Yeah,
this is a
yeah,
big part of your story. So I really wanted that one jumped off the page to me. So
yeah.
thanks for
Good.
unpacking that. A couple other little things to touch on before we get into, like you said, part two of your life.
Mm.
Essentially, we can get into some of the things you're doing as well. Just when you had mentioned one of the boundaries that, and I might be putting words in your mouth here, but somewhat paraphrasing what you had mentioned. Just when you started drinking at home, when that started to kind of show up in that different way, when you started drinking at home, well, what else can you say about that? I'd just like to spend a bit of time on that because I know that's a big part of my story. When I crossed that boundary, when it wasn't out in social situations and it was bringing it home and I was drinking by myself, drinking and hiding, that's when it really took a right, a right turn for me and, a right turn and basically right into the ditch, quite frankly.
Mm.
So what was that
Mm.
like for you? How can you, I guess articulate that?
It's actually something I've rarely talked about, when I think about it. The first thing I'll say was there was some normalcy to it. There was when I grew up in the valleys in South Wales, there was trends and patterns. I'm not kidding you. We all had kids together. We all got married together. It was almost like, oh, he's had a kid, so I gotta have a kid. I get that. Just
Mm.
honest, that's how it felt growing
Hmm.
up.
Hmm.
And we had Zia around the same time. A couple of key friends had children as well. And when that happens, there's a part of you that is like, okay, life's going to change now because we can't go to the pubs and the clubs and just drink all the time like we used to. So, we would invite our friends around with their kids. We would play poker. That was our primary thing that connected us outside alcohol. And I just remember the kids just all being in the front room on their Nintendos. I have a photograph of this like 7 kids all on their Nintendo with a telly blasting,
Yeah.
and we're in the kitchen. They could have all walked out. We wouldn't have known. We're in the kitchen getting absolutely levered. Um, what can I say about that period of time that jumps out at me? I think the biggest thing that jumps out at me is how alcohol can really make you so selfish.
Mm. Yeah.
To think of the way I am now without alcohol and how much it's not time. When people say I don't have time to do XYZ, right? Like it's not time, it's how you spend that time. So, the time that I could, if I have 10 minutes today, like we're going to be on a podcast now until like 7 o'clock. And so that means I wouldn't have seen my daughter since I dropped her off school this morning. I'm going to take her to bed. So I probably spend like 15 to 30 minutes reading a story and stuff. And you might look at that and say, well, that's not a lot of time, is it, with your kid, like 30 minutes? But I'm going to be really present. Like I'm going to be really
Mm.
present. I'm going to be grounded. I'm going to be fully in love in that moment with that young girl, right?
Yeah.
And she's then going to know, yeah, sometimes daddy works, but when he doesn't and he's with me, he's really present with me. And as a 6-year-old, the way that we've raised her, if I'm not, she'll let me know. Like,
Yeah.
she'll
Yeah.
let me know.
Sure.
When we were drinking at home, we were not present for our kids at all. Like they were an absolute afterthought. The main goal was our enjoyment and not our children's enjoyment. And this even extended towards birthday parties. So I'm sure so many of the listeners here will will shit, will be like, yeah, that's me. From the moment that Jude, my son, was born at 1 year of age, to the time I stopped drinking when he was 10, alcohol was a part of every one of his birthday celebration. Like we
Mm.
would make sure that we had a party where there was a bar, or we had a party at home and we would flood the place with alcohol. Zia was 6 on the 27th of September, and we were in town. And my wife, Liza, we that night we were having a birthday party, and she said our friends were coming around with their 3 kids. And Liza said, do we get beer for them? Like, because we know they drink beer, right? And I said, no. And she said, oh, well, I'm sure they would appreciate it because they drink it. And I said, well, I to me it's really important that we don't normalize drinking alcohol with celebrations and that it's need that adults drink it when we have gatherings and birthdays. Do you care about it? To which she was like, no. And I was like, okay, you don't care about it. I really, really care about it. So in this instance, I would like it if you would side with me and we don't get any. And she said, okay, I agree with you. We won't get any, right? My first relationship ended because my wife at the time was unable to make that change. Like she wasn't able to stop drinking alcohol. And I wasn't able to be in a relationship with somebody who was drinking alcohol, right? So and it's really difficult for somebody when they're trapped in that loop, because let's be honest, like it's like smoking cigarettes. You never think the doom's going to come.
Right.
Like I remember smoking cigarettes when I was young. I was like, am I going to die of cancer? Probably, but that's going to be a long time away.
Yeah.
Right? That
Right.
was how my brain worked then.
Yeah, totally.
Is my wife going to leave me? Maybe, but that's a long way away. And Matt, I get a lot of people on the phone with me wanting to do coaching and stuff, and I'll say to them, is your wife going to leave you? No. Do the kids hate you? Are they going to leave you? No, they don't really know, because I did quite well. Are you going to lose your job? No, I'm working from home. They don't really know. And then I'm like, all right, you're pretty doomed because nothing's changing. There's no
Right.
pain here,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Man, that's so relatable. So relatable.
Mm.
You mentioned and I think this will be a good segue into, this second part of your life. One of your motivators, one of your key motivators is like kind of sticking it to the alcohol industry, how glorified and normalized. To me, I'm wondering what your take is on this too. Is like I wanted to see it go the way of the cigarette, where everything is like it's not popularized in movies. Like remember back in the '90s, Fight Club. Every time anything happened, the guy has a lit cigarette in his, and that's just like not really the thing anymore, right? And cigarettes have been so. You know what I mean? It's taken a while, don't get me wrong, but it's, over the last 15, 20 years, cigarettes are a lot more over there
Mm.
than as prominent as they are. I'm hoping that's what it becomes of alcohol, and wonder what your take is on that. But before we do that, like, was there anything specific? Did you have a moment where there was? Do you want to speak on it, like a rock bottom moment, or was it sort of just a gradual thing where you just like you hit the wall and you're just get enough, and then using the whole alcohol industry as sort of like that motivator, like the reason why, other than of course like cleaning up for your family and such, which I imagine is a big part as well.
I'm gonna write a memoir one day, and I will pick out an event that will be defined as my all is lost moment. It didn't, because that's what story wants, right? Like,
Right.
that's what makes a great story. But for me, there was no real all is lost moment. I mean, other than my wife sitting me down, but I'd already stopped drinking then, saying like I want a divorce, right?
Right.
It was more of a I guess you call it a Hail Mary in the States, right? It was
Yeah.
kind of like I I just was losing control. Now, this is where, for me, my unhealthy dysfunction actually helped me.
Hmm.
Like, so I don't like being out of control. Like, I'm like this little pit bull. Everyone's calling me a chink and an English so and so. I can't have what everybody else has got because we don't have any money.
Hmm.
And I'm just like this, self-entitled little brat that just wants everything and I can't have my own way. So I developed this kind of like real hatred of anybody trying to control me, or like, you can be my boss and if I respect you, but if I don't respect you and you're my boss, then like I'm end up gonna get fired, right? Like, because I
Right.
cannot. And same with relationships. Like, if my wife is trying to control me all the time, I struggle with it because I'm like, this woman's trying to control me, which is a whole other masculine feminine thing, for
Yeah.
another time maybe. But
Sure.
yeah, so I forgot what I was talking about then. What was I talking about?
Well, just there was no
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Just
So there was no kind of like big moment. It was just that I was losing control. And what did that look like? I was fighting with my wife all the time. So I don't like that.
yeah.
And there's a lot of research out there that says when men and women fight, it's the man who can't handle it. The man
Hmm.
cannot handle. John Gottman, do any research on John Gottman, and he says in his studies the man really struggles emotionally when there's fighting and conflict in a household much more than a woman. Like the
Okay.
woman can handle it more than a man. And that really is true for me in my relationships. I feel so ashamed, and not so much ashamed now, but guilt and needing to seek forgiveness, really, really quick, because I feel so bad about what I've done,
Yeah,
and that
yeah.
was happening all the time, and I couldn't control it. And partly because, I was just getting drunk all the time. And that's when we were fighting all the time. So like my dysfunction of not wanting to be controlled was like, okay, alcohol's controlling me
Yeah.
and I can't do this. Now, I had stopped smoking 10 years before using the Alan Carr method,
Okay.
just
Yeah.
read his book.
Hmm.
So I just remember going to the bookstore. My wife, it was a Starbucks attached to it. She went and got a drink of coffee. I picked up this book. My son Jude was like, what's that book? And I was like, this is a book that's going to change our marriage. I guess that is that is my inciting incident. That's the moment where you're like, is it going to work? Right.
Yes. Yeah.
So I didn't even finish the book because I knew his method from when I stopped smoking, and I just applied it to alcohol. And then over the years, I've added more and more of what I've learned, because I'm a voracious reader and learner,
Mm.
to pile on top of it and then come up with my own kind of like stride method, if you will.
Which is honestly a perfect segue. You can tell you're a podcast host. It's you're making the interview nice and easy for me here. Let's hear about the Strive method, and then before we
my
end, I really
my
want to.
book,
There we go.
my
Look at
book,
this.
yeah, my
Amazing. Yeah.
book, the
Tell us
stride
all about
method.
it. That's amazing.
So this is Strive method: control alcohol in 30 days, so it doesn't control you for the next 30 years. And
Brilliant.
if you go over to www.thestrivemethod.com, you'll be able to buy the book and get a load of free gifts and all that kind of stuff.
It's wonderful.
But the Strive method, where did the Strive method come from? So it has a lot of influence around Alan Carr. I think the influence to Alan Carr that I drew from Alan Carr the most was it hit me more with smoking, right? When he said, Lee, this cigarette that you're putting in your mouth now and you're lighting it up, really just ask yourself, what is it really providing you? Like, write a list of all the things you think it's providing you, and then light a cigarette and ask yourself, is this true?
Yeah.
And I realized, I was like, oh my God, like none of these are true. So it's like, why am I smoking then? And the only answer I could come up with was, I'm addicted. There's no other reason why I would be smoking these things. And then I was like, okay, I'm not going to smoke them anymore because there's no value. And the addiction just ended, just like that.
Wow.
I haven't smoked for 21 years, right? I just said one day, I'm not going to smoke, didn't smoke. So I applied the same thing with alcohol. I wrote a big list of all the things that I thought alcohol provided me with. It improves social interaction, makes me funny, blah, blah, blah. And then I looked at them all and I was like, nope, none of these are actually true, right? None of these are actually true. So why am I drinking? Now, I realized that I was drinking because I was addicted, but there was another element that I'd realized that I was drinking, which I had never even looked at in smoking. It's the same thing. And that is how culture and societal conditioning plays into it. And the best way that this really hammered home, because I didn't have a structure or a framework around my theory, right? Which is why you should read a lot, because when you read a lot, you learn framework and structure of other people and you can pinch it off them. But there's an amazing woman called Melanie Joy, and she read a book, and I always butcher the title, Why We Eat Pigs, Where Cows Are, and Eat Dogs or somebody. I can't remember. It was a book on veganism.
Interesting. I'll have to look
by
that
Melanie
up.
Joy. Let's Google it because I always butcher it. 1 second. Melanie Joy. Why we love dogs, eat pigs, and wear cows.
Oh, and wear cows. Okay, the leather.
Yeah.
So choice of words, butchering it too. By the way, sorry.
Yeah. So I'm reading this book, and Melanie Joy is saying, I eat an hamburger one day, I get really sick, like really sick. And then I'm like, I don't want to eat an hamburger. And I ask myself the question, why am I eating this hamburger? Why am I eating this hamburger from a cow that we killed? And I'm stroking a golden retriever. And I would never dream of killing the golden retriever. and eating it. What is that about? And then she's a psychologist. She goes down the rabbit hole, and she literally cannot find any logical reason why you would not eat the golden retriever, but you would eat the cat, right?
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right, you could listen to this and say, oh yeah, it tastes better. We know they eat dogs in different countries, right?
Yeah.
We know they eat horse in different countries. So she realized that one of the reasons that most people eat meat in the West is because of an invisible, violent, and dominant belief system that has no name, like because we don't
Okay.
question it. So
Yeah.
my 6-year-old this morning, I made the sausages. She didn't look at it and say, Dad, this is a sausage. This is meat, came from an animal. Why am I eating it? She ate it
Yeah.
because I gave it to her.
Gotcha.
So she grows up, and at some point she may change her mind, but by that time it's going to be really difficult because she's ate it all her life.
Right.
So I have a chapter in my book, Conversations with God. Zia goes to a Catholic school right now. She sits down at dinner and she says grace. She believes in God and scripture and all that kind of stuff. And me and Liza don't.
Ah.
Now we don't talk to her. She doesn't ask her questions yet. She's only 6. If we stay clear of that and just allow her to continue that journey, then it's going to be much harder for her to not believe in God or believe in something else as she
Sure.
gets further on down the line, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So she named this thing, right? She called it carnism. And she said, there's an invisible, violent, and dominant belief system. I'm going to call it carnism. And this is why we eat meat. And it was a whole philosophy of framework and structure around how the meat industry really, the truth of it is really hidden from the beautiful steak we see in front of us.
Sure. Sure.
Like for example, the whiteness of chicken. Like chicken meat is not white, for example, right?
Yeah.
So she talks about that. And I was like, holy shit, this is my framework.
Yeah.
We drink alcohol because there is an invisible, violent, and dominant belief system that trains us to drink it from birth. It's violent because it kills more than 3.3 million people a year. I have a book, I can't remember the name of it now, but it has statistics on falls, trips, suicides, homicides, accidents, drownings in lakes, falling off ladder, you name it.
Yeah.
Alcohol consumption is one of the greatest contributory factors to all of that shit, right? And you just have to go down town centre on a Saturday night here in Cardiff. Why do we have security men on the door if alcohol is a social lubricant?
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So it's violent.
Yeah.
Right? And all of my violence, my major violent moments in my life have come out of alcohol. Either me drinking it or someone drinking it violent on me. It's dominant because, according to the last WHO reports, more than 52% of people drink the stuff. And if you narrow that down, Ed, all of you listening, and just say, okay, of my small inner circle of people, how many of them drink alcohol? You'll find the vast majority of them do. It's dominant.
Yeah.
And it's invisible because there's no name for it.
Right.
So I called it alcoholism. So we strive, we say alcoholism is an invisible, violent, and dominant belief system. And that's why we drink alcohol. And understanding the belief system, which is the Strive method, is your way out, basically.
Yeah.
It's understanding things like status, right?
Yeah.
One that I want to talk to you about in more depth when we flip the microphone is this thing about, I can't tell people I don't drink. The shame of it.
Yep.
Think about that for a moment, everybody. I can't tell people that I don't want to drink. Like grown-ass men who would go to war and defend our country pretty good because they're big, 6-foot strong men, are afraid to tell people that they don't drink alcohol. That in itself is a massive reason why alcoholism as an invisible, violent, and dominant belief system does so well. It is so effective because it can reduce a man to a shriveling little boy who's ashamed and embarrassed. Why? Because all of alcohol's marketing and advertising, it lynches on status. And it's not even the alcohol industry. Everybody who drinks is a walking, talking billboard, right?
Yep. Yeah.
You know, if you go to the pub with your mates every week, go to football with them and go drink with them, and afterwards, all of a sudden you're saying to yourself, wow, actually, alcohol is a big part of being a man, right? Alcohol is a big part of, and the more you drink is a big part of being a big man,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Where'd you go from there, right? So the Strive method, it's a 6-month workshop. In the which there's 6 different phases. So there's start, thought, ready, initiative, vigilance, and evolution. There's like a pre-recovery, a recovery, and a post-recovery period. So for the first 3 months, we're not asking anybody to stop drinking because nobody wants to. We're just there to help them understand the system a little bit more. And then whilst they're going through, so there's like over 120 assignments. So while they're doing their assignments, we have a community forum on Discord as well, and we're very quest orientated. So one quest that we've introduced that I'm doing this week is the appreciation quest. So
Cool.
you know, for 7 days, I have to show appreciation to 3 people a day. If I want to do the more advanced, I got to do it for 14 days. More advanced again, I got to do it for 30 days. So we have lots of quests that get people to what I call live a self-led life without alcohol. And then when working on that, then the need to drink alcohol is much more diminished, you know?
Sounds amazing. I really like, yeah, everything you're saying today is just really landing and resonating. You can tell that you have done a lot of both research, but you have the, the experiential learning on your side of things. And yeah, just, I love the idea of having a 6-month, program where somebody can come in, just come as you are. It doesn't have to be, don't, just have that curiosity, that desire to stop drinking, and it doesn't have to be left right at the door. There's going to be some walking up to it. So yeah, Lee, I think what you're doing is fantastic. Before we leave, a couple things, just, you touched on the podcast a little bit. So you've been a podcaster for quite some time. Sounds like you just switched the branding of it, or the name of it, essentially. So 1,000 Days Sober Podcast. And then after you do that, we'll just give you a chance to we'll have everything else in the show notes, by the way, but I'll just give you a chance to, where people can find you to reach out to you. So the podcast and where to find you online, please.
Yeah, the podcast. Wow, it's been quite a journey. It's like one thing I'd like to tell your listeners is that have belief that anything is possible. I remember when I stopped drinking, I bought Jack Canfield's Success Principles book, and he said you could be and do whatever you want to be. And I was a very, very senior manager in DB Schenker, which is a German freight logistics company at the time. And I read Jack Canfield's book, and I felt so powerful because I just stopped drinking. And I was like, fuck it, I'm gonna quit. I'm gonna retire early, and I'm gonna be a professional poker player. I'm going to travel the world playing poker, and I'm going to use the money I earn to create a company that helps people quit alcohol, right?
Wow.
And I started working with Jack Canfield's team, and I was really struggling with meaning and purpose. And my coach, Michelle, at the time, she said to me, well, make a list of things you like doing. And I really struggled with that, to be honest, but we got there in the end. And, I won't tell the whole list, but one of them was, I love the sound of my own voice. I love talking. I love telling stories. Maybe it's not all healthy, but I like it. That's what I like to do. And I ended up creating a podcast where I interview amazing people like you. I ended up interviewing and being an interviewer in the poker industry and creating content for poker, interviewing some of the smartest minds in the world. Wow. And I've been really, really fortunate. I've interviewed people like Paul Pierce, Bruce Buffer, Norm Macdonald,
wow.
Sergio Garcia I interviewed. It's been really, really fortunate to interview Melanie Joy, who I just spoke about. I managed to interview her a couple of times. So yeah, the podcast it's been going for a long, long time. It has a lot of good people on there. The videos are on YouTube, and then the audio is available on all main podcast players. The reason we called it 1,000 Days Sober is we switched brands for a time, and our goal was to get people to 1,000 Days Sober. which
That's
is
cool.
like 2.7 years. We call Strive now. Our community is Strive. People still strive for that 2.7 years, and it's a big thing when people get there.
That's so
But that's
cool.
why it's called, that's why it's
Yeah.
called 1,000 Days Sober.
So it does very much tie into the community and the course and the
Yeah,
program.
yeah,
That's so cool, dude. I
yeah.
really love what you're doing, man. It's been a pleasure talking to you today, and I guess I'll be talking to you very shortly on your podcast.
Yeah,
But
we're gonna do it the other
if
way.
yeah, what's the easiest way? Where are you most like present? Is it social media or is it an email you want to disclose? And as I mentioned, we'll definitely have all your links in the show notes for everybody to find. But yeah, how can somebody get a hold of you?
I would say that if you are interested, the best way to learn about the Stripe method is to buy the book, right? Because it's like $4, right?
Cool.
And if
Yeah.
you can't afford $4, email me at thestrivemethod@gmail.com and I'll give it you for nothing. But go
Cool.
to www.thestrivemethod.com and you'll find the condensed version. So you'll find basically 30 chapters that will help you stop drinking for 30 days. And then when you've read that, it will really give you a great understanding of the philosophy and the framework of the Strive method. And if you're interested in that, it will tell you in the book where to go. If you want to just reach out to me and just say, hey, I listen to a podcast and I want to continue the conversation on XYZ, or I've got this question or that question, just email me at thestrivemethod@gmail.com. A lot of people think that they're in this alone, that people are out of their reach. That's not been my experience, actually. The reason I've been able to get so many great people on my podcast, you just ask them,
Right.
So
Yeah.
and if I'm too busy, I'll just let you know. So just email me at thestrivemethod@gmail.com if you've got any questions. Yeah.
It's brilliant. Lee, thank you so much for your time today. And I guess I will see you shortly on the other channel.
On the old channel. All right.
Awesome.
Thank you very much,
Brilliant.
man.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.